Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are delighted to have you, Secretary, with us this afternoon. I think it's a privilege because there's so much going on in the US. Here in Europe, our energy systems are being reshuffled. But before we talk about energy, we have to talk about the US and France, because we are celebrating this year the 250th anniversary of course, the United States independence. But I think France has contributed quite a lot to that. So it's also about US-France friendship.
Yes.
So I think that deserves a nice applause. And I think that should be really the spirit also of all the events that will take place this year. We have a nuclear summit in March. There will be, of course, the IEA ministerial, but also towards September, another major nuclear event with the Nuclear Energy Agency. So a lot about nuclear, and I think that's also what brings us so close together, because there is probably no other country that is so passionate as the US is about nuclear, that has such ambition as France, and they have just been reaffirmed recently in our energy policy framework. So that goes into the right direction. But one thing we don't have yet is the 5-megawatt reactor you have been in, flying to Utah. So that is very interesting, and we, of course, will be looking forward to that. But Secretary, I think one thing in between Europe and the US is the following. We have a switch. We used to have for several years converging energy regulations and policies, but very little trade. And now we have diverging regulation and policies, but a lot of trade. And it's growing by the day. And I think, frankly, at the end of this year, we will beat the record of 2025 in terms of LNG exports from the US to Europe. Because if I look at the storage levels this year here in Europe after the winter, they will be so low that we will need to import much more US LNG. So we are probably going to hit close to 85, 90 BCM of gas by the end of this year. So it's remarkable. That would mean that basically US could supply up to 70% of Europe's LNG. And we are interdependent because obviously you don't have anywhere else to send that LNG. And we need this LNG equally because we have no other options around, or they are very complicated. So a lot is happening, but we have so many common challenges. The grid build out. We have to ramp up manufacturing of power electronics. We have to find the people to operate all these new infrastructure, to do all these investments. We have to bring more women into the energy sector because otherwise it won't work. I think we have to mobilize the insurance companies to insure all these new infrastructure, the data centers, the new nuclear power plants, etc., etc. So basically, that also brings us together. How do we address all these common challenges together? So a lot to discuss. Secretary, very, very happy that you joined us this afternoon. I invite you to take the floor. You have some remarks to deliver us, and then we'll have a conversation and take a lot of questions from the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Please.
So fantastic to be here. And yes, as my friend and colleague, Secretary Rubio said, we are children of Europe. The United States relationship with the nations of Europe is our longest and most important relationships. In fact, my wife is sitting in the stage right up here. We had lunch with one of our cousins today who's French. Her family is from Switzerland and France. My family, my descendants a ways back are from England, but that's what Americans are. The Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the age of scientific discovery, all of that started here in Europe. I'm a lover of scientific advancement and progress. And, my youth was reading about European scientists, European philosophers, European political organization, and leading ultimately to the modern world. So, yeah, I come in that very positive thing. But we diverged. We diverged in 2010 on energy. If you look back in the year 2010, energy prices were a little bit higher in Europe than in the United States, but not a lot, actually. Even at diesel, gasoline, electricity, just a little bit of divergence. In 2010, the United States was 25% of global consumption. And the European Union, the nations that then can encompass the European Union, were 25% of global consumption. Little larger population, little bit lower per capita income. Today, The United States is 28% of global consumption, and the same nations are about 17% of global consumption. We've had very little to no economic growth in dollar terms in the EU in the last 17 years. Man, I lament that. Like these are awesome countries, awesome businesses, awesome humans, awesome educational systems. But by making energy more expensive and unreliable, it's led to a deindustrialization, a lack of investment, and a harder to make ends meet. President Trump brought to Washington and to the United States for energy policy, he brought back common sense and humanism. You get energy wrong, almost nothing else matters. President Trump's an East Coast real estate developer. He's not an energy guy, but he instinctually gets energy. That the answer for America, and he believes for the world, all nations of the world, it's not just an answer for America, is more energy, massively more energy of all kinds that are affordable, reliable, and abundant. Well, my whole life, the goal was America's got to be energy independent. We've got to produce more energy than we consume, which we last did in the mid-1950s, long before I was born. That was our goal. And when I first met President Trump, talked energy, I was like, and we've achieved it. He's like, well, that's the wrong goal. It's not energy independence. It should be energy dominance. We should produce so much energy that we can reshore all the industries we pushed overseas to Asia, as European nations did, even to a larger extent. We should be able to reshore those. We should be able to win the race in AI. And we should have so much energy that we can export it abroad to all our allies and friends abroad that today depend on hostile or unreliable powers. That was his vision of energy. Lots of energy, drive down prices, increase wages, increase opportunity. But in short, energy is life. The absence of energy is death, is despair, is poverty, is reduced opportunity set. To me, energy should be about two things. It's about humans and it's about math. Humans, because the only reason we consume energy is to make human lives better, and math. Are we investing in an energy source that will make energy lower cost, more affordable, more reliable, and expand opportunities? Or does the math make energy more scarce and more expensive and reduce the quality of human life? Humans and math. Before the arrival of modern energy, hydrocarbons, and all the other energy sources, geothermal, nuclear, solar, wind, they're all derivative sources of hydrocarbons. You cannot have them without hydrocarbons. But the first arrival of hydrocarbons, heat in the Dutch Golden Age in the early 1600s, became the major energy source. The windmills are what you see in the paintings, but they were a tiny percent of Dutch energy. It was the use of peat in Holland that led it to become the wealthiest per capita nation on the planet and have a global empire. Coal was a larger resource that England very early on developed, started an industrial revolution, transformed the future of the British people. Hydrocarbons transformed global life expectancy from 30 years all around the planet throughout all of human history until about 2 years ago to today. Global life expectancy at birth is 73 years. That is energy. That is the difference there. And of course, when you have a better energized society, you can have a better social structure as well. There's longer histories about how energy resources enabled the end of slavery and the liberation of women and the structure of modern societies we have today. I won't go into that. But we've gotten off track on energy. And well, I should say, we shouldn't, it's way too early to get off track. 1 billion people live a life remotely recognizable to any of us in this planet. Now, 1 billion people is a lot. The modern world's pretty awesome. We fly on planes and trains and cars. We wear fancy clothes made with and out of hydrocarbons. We have modern medicine. We have all these great things. That 1 billion people consume about 13 barrels of oil per person per year. The other 7 billion people on planet Earth consume 3 barrels of oil on average per person per year. And in Africa, it's less than 1 barrel. And of those 7 billion people, I've yet to meet one of them that does not want our standard of living. We have 2 billion people today that still cook their meals the way our ancestors did, burning mostly wood or agricultural waste or dung. We have 2 million deaths every year from indoor air pollution because they don't have basic clean cooking fuel, just a cook stove and propane. We have in our own country, in the United States, 10% of people before President Trump was elected, got a utility disconnection notice in the previous 12 months. Most of them did not get their utilities disconnected, but imagine driving your kids to school, struggling to pay your bills and thinking, how am I going to tell my kid? Lights could go out. We got off track because of a wild misunderstanding, exaggeration, and for political reasons using climate change, a real physical phenomenon I've studied and worked in and spoken about for 20 years. It is a real thing, but it has gotten so ridiculously out of whack that we've driven policies that have just driven up energy, driven deindustrialization, and made our countries geopolitically weaker. To give a few numbers on that, the globe has spent $10 trillion on wind, solar, batteries, and transmission lines to connect low energy dense remote energy sources. $10 trillion. And the last full year of data is available. That $10 trillion got us 2.6% of global energy, 1.2% from solar, 1.4% from wind. And that 2.6% actually is a very low value, 2.6%, because it's intermittent. And it's in the electricity grid where you can't have intermittency. You have to deliver firm electricity. So its impact of a modest amount of energy has to drive up electricity prices. 28 states in the United States have renewable portfolio standards. On average, they have 50% higher electricity prices than the other 22 states. And of course, in Europe, you've far surpassed even California. France has been a star, but if we look to Germany and Denmark and United Kingdom and people that have embraced the climate movement to an extreme, they've just driven prices so high that they produce meaningfully less energy and meaningfully less electricity today than they did 17 years ago. So they've driven the price up and the quantity down, and the economic and geopolitical consequences are there for all to see. And what was this all in the name of, right? It was, if you spend $10 trillion and you only change 2.6% of the energy system, you're not solving climate change. You're not changing global emissions. In fact, when the IEA, International Energy Agency, was formed 50 years ago after the Yom Kippur War, we got about 83% of global energy from hydrocarbons. Last year, we got about 83% of global energy from hydrocarbons. That's oil, gas, and coal. And what was the largest source besides that 83% from hydrocarbons? It was the same 50 years ago as it was today, wood. Wood, fortunately, has gone down from 12% down to only a little less than 6% today. Thankfully, that's declined. That's the biggest health impacts. But it's still twice wind, solar, and batteries combined. So we need to be sensible about energy. We say it's in the name of fighting a crisis. Well, deaths from extreme weather last year, among the lowest ever recorded. All the years of below 10,000 deaths globally from extreme weather have been in the last decade. 100 years ago, 500,000 people a year on average died from extreme weather in a population 4 times less than today's population. The risk of extreme weather has never been lower than it is today. That's the human risk. You say, wow, the economic toll, that's what's disastrous. If you correct inflation-adjusted losses from extreme weather events, they've declined about 20% over the 30, 35 years that we have a good data set at. Also, downward trend. If you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports on hurricanes and floods and droughts and tornadoes, all of them are no trend. They're scary, real things, but they're not increasing, despite the media and politicians repeatedly saying it. So climate change is a real thing, but we should be thoughtful and reasonable about it. But the way to a better world for our citizens and for the planet as a whole is just massively more energy resources from wherever is affordable, reliable, and secure, outside of hydrocarbons, which are, man, I went to college to work on fusion energy. I went to graduate school to work on solar energy. I worked on geothermal energy right after it. I was late to the hydrocarbon game. My life has been about other energy sources, but it is very hard to compare what you can get from hydrocarbons in a cost, flexibility, reliability, security perspective. Nuclear is the technology out of those three that I think has the greatest growth potential, because it can produce not just electricity, but also process heat. I'll end with that last data nerdy point. 20% of global primary energy is delivered via electricity wires. It's cool. It's great. We use it for AI. We use it for all of this. Electricity is awesome. but 20% of global primary energy arrives via electricity wires. The biggest use of energy is from manufacturing, is to make materials. So we can make buildings and cars and planes and internets and data centers. Almost half of energy is used to manufacture materials, and the key part of that energy is high temperature process heat. We get that only from burning wood, oil, gas, or coal. We could get that from nuclear energy. That reactor we carried in that plane yesterday was a high temperature gas-cooled reactor, so that it can be used not just for electricity, but for process heat. So to me, we got to return the focus on energy and climate change to humans and math, and grow our alliance and partnership technologically, economically, and militarily between the United States and Europe. Thank you.
Wow, that was a breathtaking food for thought, Secretary. Thank you so much.
I got to stir the pot.
Yeah, well, I think that was really successful. If I may start, and we'll then collect immediately questions, but perhaps two to start with. And one is, as I said in my remarks, we are now your biggest LNG customer. So all of us in Europe. So as the biggest customer, of course, we are very interested in your future ability to produce. And so what is exactly the equation that you see for your natural gas exports? Because on the one hand, you have the domestic supply, which is increasing, but at the same time, domestic demand is increasing as well, notably for power generation. At the same time, you are planning a lot of new authorizations for new LNG export plants. And in a way, where do you see that going? Do you think that, you will be able to export full steam, flat out, and maintaining low prices in the US and serving your needs? Also possibly exporting to Europe, but how about Asia? Is that in your scope? And when looking into where you've been traveling, a lot to Europe, a lot to the Middle East, not so much to Asia, if I'm not mistaken. So would you consider also a strategy perhaps to try to push out some coal in Asia to place more US LNG because that's performing and it's safe and it comes from you? And the second question on the grid aspect, because frankly, both in Europe and the US, we have terribly underinvested into grids. I mean, that is for sure, as we say here. And now the issue is, how are we going to really live up? Because demand is increasing so fast, but grid development is very challenging. So what's your magic recipe for that, if you have one? Or is it more decentralized power generation using, for example, those small microreactor that you've been just installing?
So the last question's complicated. I love it, but I'll come back to it. But regarding natural gas, because I do get asked that question a lot in Asia and in Europe and here, is the U.S. going to have enough natural gas? And this is one of the beauties of the shale revolution, is almost all the oil and gas that was ever created in the world is stuck in these rocks called shales. They're very impermeable. That's where it all is. A little bit of it is seeped out and floated up into porous reservoirs in the Middle East and the US where we drill it and produce it out of. But the vast majority of it's still in the source rocks. So the shale revolution was we figured out how to get natural gas straight out of the source rocks. And the size of the resources are absolutely enormous. Like only a tiny percent of the shales in the United States are even drilling and developing. Because we found the few best ones, or what we think are the best ones. We may find some other ones better later, and we're producing from those. But if you go back just 20 years ago, the United States was the largest importer of natural gas in the world. And we were running 1,200 rigs drilling for natural gas. 1,200 rigs, we were the largest importer. Today, we're by far and away the world's largest exporter, and we're running 120 rigs for natural gas. A 90% decline in the number of rigs we have drilling to produce natural gas. We've more than doubled our production and become the world's largest exporter. So they say, we're a very big exporter of natural gas right now. And if we wanted to double United States' exports to Europe, double our exports to Asia, double all of our United States natural gas exports, we'd need to add about 15 or 20 drilling rigs. Well, we got 900 that are, so would it be hard to add to grow production there? No. The only limit on natural gas is the ability to move it. Natural gas is much cheaper than oil. It burns cleaner than oil. And when I say clean, I mean pollutants, burns cleaner, and it has lower greenhouse gas emissions, a separate issue, but it wins on all those categories, and it's massively cheaper. But you need infrastructure, pipelines, liquefaction, and the ability to move it around the world. But when I looked at energy from that 2010 period to today, by far the fastest growing energy source in the world in absolute terms is natural gas. Coal and oil are second and third, but natural gas is the fastest growing energy source. If you go back 50 years ago, as he said, we got 83% of our energy from hydrocarbons. Today we get 83% of our energy from hydrocarbons. But over that 50 years, oil's grown a little over 1% compound annual growth rate. It's the most flexible, but the most expensive. Coal's grown 2% compound annual growth rate. It's much cheaper, but still easy to transport, but not as flexible. Natural gas has grown 3% compound annual growth rate. And the future probably will grow much faster if we can build the infrastructure to move it. So yeah, can we continue to supply Europe at very low prices? Absolutely, for as far as the eye can see.
So that's good news. And the grids.
The grids. So I talk about the shale revolution. The US in the last 20 years, we've tripled our oil production, more than doubled our natural gas production, but we barely produce more electricity today than we did 20 years ago. It's embarrassing. And China, as you've all seen, has just skyrocketed their growth of electricity production, and they've barely grown their oil production and barely grown their natural gas production. But in their case, maybe it's technology and resource base. In our case, it's just a regulatory regime that we made it expensive and cumbersome and messed up markets to build and sell electricity generation. Part of it for crazy climate policies, part of it just for the structure of electricity markets. Let me give one example for that. People tell me with AI coming on, and in the United States, we ended the subsidies, or ended is even too strong of a word. We're phasing out the 34-year-old subsidies for natural gas and solar energy, and we're just going to end the start of them. They'll roll out in a year or so, and then we'll still pay them for 10 years after when something comes on. But so the Democrats say to me, well, why we need all the electrons on the grid, all the electrons on the grid. That's not how electricity works. It just matters if you can supply electricity at peak demand time. In the middle of the day, we have hundreds of gigawatts of spare capacity. When the wind comes up and the wind turbines blow, it just means that natural gas or some other power plant turns down to accommodate that wind. You know what it saves us when we don't generate that electricity from natural gas? 2 cents. We don't burn 2 cents worth of natural gas, and we send a 4-cent subsidy check to the producer of the wind power, who also gets paid by the utility, who also has all the transmission lines into the rate base. So we made it so it didn't make sense to build new electricity generating stuff unless you were on the government subsidy take. And we paid the same amount for electricity that you don't know if it's going to be there, might be there, might not be there. We just had a very cold spell in the United States. In fact, we had the largest ever draw, 1 week draw out of natural gas ever in United States history. And that's significant because natural gas is the #1 heating fuel in the United States, and it's by far our largest source of electricity. So we had a widespread, large cold front. We drew a huge amount of natural gas to keep the lights on and people's houses warm. In New England, at the very peak demand time, because that's the time that matters. If you're 10% below the peak, still got spare capacity. And you could put a data center on if that was the peak, but you have to be there at the very peak demand time. At the very peak demand time in New England, wind, solar, and batteries were 2% of New England electricity. Burning trash and wood was 3%. You know, a lot of days it's windy, but when you've got a high pressure cold front sitting there in the wintertime, which is increasingly when we have peak demand times, there's no solar and there's very little wind. So you have to have all the other generation capacity. The United States grid runs on nuclear, coal, and gas, and some hydro, but we're not developing any new hydro. But essentially, we are gas, coal, and nuclear. It's gas, nuclear, and coal in that order in total electricity generated in the United States. But at peak demand during all the storms, it was gas, then coal, then nuclear, because coal could ramp up a lot when we needed a lot of electricity. Nuclear was reliable, steady Eddie, very flat during that. Wind power in those 4 cold days. So not just the peak moment, but so we had windy periods throughout all that. There was low pressure systems moving around. So we got a fair amount of wind power, but 40% less than we got at the same week last year. So if you get to peak demand time and your output consistently goes down, that's not very valuable.
Yes, and then you need obviously storage, battery, or demand side flexibility that can also come into play. And
yeah, we have 3 or 4 minutes of battery storage in the United States. Take all the batteries in the United States, including in all the electric cars, we can store our electric grid output for 3 or 4 minutes. Yes. So the storm was several days. So,
but battery costs are down, so we can put even more. But definitely,
there is a role for batteries to move electricity and shave that very highest of peaks. But they're orders of magnitude away from being meaningful energy storage for the ebbs and flows of demands.
But so did we also find out in Europe that in deep winter times, well, solar panels are covered by snow and you have less wind, obviously. So the flexibility issue is the same. And so hence, we are going to build a few gas peaker plants, notably in Germany. And I think that makes a lot of sense in these circumstances. Can I ask the room for questions? I'm sure you have many. Just raise your hand, or in the back and here in the front. So we'll start in the front and then we'll move in the back. So 2 here and then 2 there. Yes.
Secretary Wright, it's an honor to welcome you in Paris, and thank you so much for selecting Orano, for supporting the US objectives to restore its domestic enrichment capacity and to stop its reliance on Russia for the import of enriched uranium. Also,
thank you for that partnership.
Yeah, thanks so much, Secretary Wright. Also, I would like to applaud you and your team for launching this IFRI for the nuclear life cycle innovation campuses. As you know, also Orano, we've been the Western world leader in reprocessing and recycling. We've done it for 60 years. And we're currently in discussions with several states in the Midwest, on the East Coast, to help them answer this RFI. So I would like to know your vision regarding reprocessing. What are the next steps to see the United States restore also its reprocessing and recycling capacity, as they had started back in 1944, to convert these 95,000 metric tons of spent fuels from a liability into a significant asset for national security and energy dominance?
So fantastic. So I should say as well, Orano is a French company and a fantastic company. The whole suite of nuclear technologies. We have let too much of our nuclear industry atrophy in the United States, and we're trying to stand it back up. And we have many efforts in that front. And Orano is a key partner in doing just that. We banned reprocessing foolishly way back in the 1970s. All the first run fuel rods are in, and we don't have permanent repositories, so they're in swimming pools or in dry cask storage. We want to have a nuclear renaissance. We got to get serious about this stuff. So we will start reprocessing, likely in partnership with Orano. We're going to reestablish uranium enrichment in the United States, some with American companies, some with our partners from France. And our idea, so in the United States, we've tried to find a permanent repository of waste, and they've had, I think, the wrong approach. They picked a place in Nevada and told everyone it will be here. Well, if you tell someone you're going to post something on them, my answer is, no, you're not. No, you're not. And that's what everyone said. No, you're not. And so we said, we're going to do it differently. Who wants to host a nuclear innovation campus that'll have reprocessing and fuel fabrication and enrichment and nuclear reactors? And of course, after you reprocess the remaining amounts of long-term waste that needs to be disposed, you dispose right there. Oh my God, every governor's my best friend now, beating down our door and wants to compete for this. So I think we will, through just opt-in market mechanisms, we're going to develop multiple long-term repositories for nuclear waste because we want to see nuclear grow. We see it as a great long-term energy source. Since our industry's atrophied in the short run, it's going to move slower than we like and be more expensive than we like. But if we can get volume up and innovation up and time down, we believe the costs will drive down a lot. So we are big believers in a renaissance coming in nuclear energy in the United States and around the world. And we appreciate your partnership in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great success story. And by the way, we have a great underground waste disposal site in France, which you should visit because it's really state of the art. And it is a facility where all the data is freely available. So you could also learn a lot from that in the US.
I was planning to visit that and the reprocessing on this trip, but calendar didn't let me do it. But they are high on my list to visit. Wow. Yeah, the French have been leaders in this area. You know, hats off to France.
Excellent. A question here?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for your remark. It's great to see you again. We met in Washington at the NPC in December. We're very honored to be members of the NPC through our chairman, Andrew Gould.
Yes.
There's never been a Secretary of Energy in the US that knows more about oil and gas than you do from your background in the industry. My question is about oil and gas, specifically about methane. Methane is a super greenhouse gas, 80 times more the warming power of CO2. US methane emissions are being constrained to some degree by the producers in the Permian and the other tight oil and gas basins. But the aggregate level of emissions going up and regulations are being rolled back. So my question is isn't that upside down? Wouldn't it make more sense to kill methane emissions than to kill methane regulations and to use the methane for data centers in the US and for exports to Europe?
No, absolutely. But of course, in the U.S., methane intensity has gone down dramatically, particularly when you look at straight natural gas production. You talk about associated gas production with oil things, room for improvement there. But that has continually gotten better. I was a producer in North Dakota 15 years ago, wildly different world. Those have continually gone down, but not for regulatory reasons. They've been gone down for investor concerns, employee concerns, just kind of do your right thing. We had an idea and did pass at the federal level a methane regulation that would have been a total disaster. It would have just destroyed all the small producers. Big companies love big regulation. It would have been beautiful for the big companies in our country, but it would have been ruinous. Just the compliance costs for the little guys, which meant they would have to go out of the methane business, so the big companies loved it. So we're about innovation, not regulation. I agree with you. We will continue to drive down methane intensity with better technology, with better sensing, with better measurement of stuff. I think that's a rapidly improving sector. I think the performance of the U.S. and the larger producers today in the U.S. is outstanding. But they're not like, oh, we're done. They're like, well, what's the next level? So it is driven by innovation, by shareholders, by employees, by neighbors. It's driven by social forces, not by regulation in the United States. And in fact, the CBAM rule into Europe, I think, is a huge risk. It's just the regulatory burden of it, I think, would stop, and the penalties associated with it would make it too risky to export natural gas to Europe. That's a loss for the U.S., but I think an even bigger loss for Europe. We got to get sensible about that. But I agree with your desire to drive down methane emissions. Maybe just different mechanisms do it, but I very much agree with your point.
So that's also very good news, because we need to find an arrangement between the European Commission and the United States and actually all the producers on this issue, because it's important, but we have to make it operational and at hand for the companies, right?
Yes.
There were questions in the back, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. You were last year in Greenland with Vice President Vance. My question is quite simple. We know there's a lot of rare earth, particularly heavy rare earth in Greenland. There's a lot of uranium capacity. There's a lot of oil and gas, 31 billion barrels of oil equivalent, according to the USGS. What is, according to you, the US energy plan in Greenland, if there's any, compared to the national security aspect of the question? Thank you.
Yeah, so the reason I went to Greenland last year and the huge U.S. interest in Greenland is really for national security, for defense shield, and for monitoring increasing activity in the Arctic. But if we're going to go and yeah, look, this issue has been way blown out of what it was never going to be. But the U.S. does have tremendous interest in using Greenland for national security. And again, not just for the U.S., for our Western allies. We think it's important that the U.S. militarily be there. But then as we always think, like, if we're going to be in Greenland, what can we bring positive for Greenlanders besides tax dollars? So mining or energy development could bring great economic opportunity to Greenland. It's very expensive to mine in a remote territory with not a lot of infrastructure, with a lot of ice. So, you know, there's certainly far more attractive places to mine for rare earth elements is a terrible name because they're everywhere. They're not rare at all. The only thing that's low is their concentration. So you want to find, relatively higher concentration with low logistics costs. So I hope we can find economic opportunities to, boost boost incomes and economic opportunity for Greenlanders, just as we want to do for Americans as well. But that's the interest isn't that. We got all sorts of places to mine rare earth metals and produce oil and gas. But it might make life better for Greenlanders. Our interest is national security, as you said.
And thanks for reminding, Secretary, that we will need a lot of low-carbon electricity that can be moved to mining areas because that are often remote, and because of the lack of infrastructure, it constrains the mining operations. And so we have to unlock that. Yes, yeah. Exactly. There was another question in the back, and then we move a bit forth. Yes.
Good afternoon, Euronews Bulgaria, Jordanka Kostadinova. So for Bulgaria and other countries in Eastern Europe, energy security is still unstable. What is the United States prepared to do to improve the process? Thank you.
Yeah, so look, as you've heard, our message for energy in Europe has been really centered around energy security. You know, we saw Europe create a dependency on an unfavorable and unreliable supplier. So our goal is to try to work with the European nations to fix that. One of the ideas is this vertical gas corridor. You know, there's 5 west-going pipelines from Russia. We can import U.S. LNG in the north, in Lithuania, and in Poland, and in the south, in Croatia, in Greece. And then we want to fill out the pipeline network to supply Central Europe with lower cost and reliable natural gas. I'm also keen in a number of the countries in Romania, in Ukraine, in Bulgaria. There are local energy resources that we're also very happy to partner with companies to develop resources there. We're in dialogue, certainly with Bulgaria, on nuclear power as well. So we are all in on energy, and we want to partner with our friends all across Europe on some individual specific deals, but ultimately on building the infrastructure so we can move energy more cheaply. Like, I would love nothing more than to see the price of electricity in Western Europe come down. I would love to see Germany and the United Kingdom and Belgium reindustrialize. These were awesome, proud industrial nations, because it makes the economy stronger, it makes the defense industry stronger, it makes stronger partners with us in the U.S. We want the wealthy, free nations to be the strongest, most powerful nations on earth. So we're not going to be subject from tyranny.
Question in the middle here. Okay, then we can start there, and then here we move to the middle. Yes, sorry.
Thank you for your time and for the very clear explanation you gave about the US policy. I'm Guillaume Emery, working in the energy industry in France. I have a question about the US grid. In the past, we heard about 5,000 kilometers of 525 kV HVDC links to synchronize the 3 electrical networks you do have in the US. Do you still have plans for the grid of such magnitude, or is this project over?
No, so we have multiple grid expansion projects connecting across grids. So I'm not sure the specific project, but definitely building grid infrastructure is on our list. And it's so slow to build transmission lines. One of my also goals, the Trump administration goal, was to make it easier to build things in America. It's so easy to stop something. It's so hard to build something. So we've built precious little transmission lines in the last 20 or 30 years. We do have a few transmission lines projects we're trying hard to push forward. Even bigger is reconductoring existing lines. How can we get more capacity through right-of-ways that we already have? But yeah, we need to invest in that. There certainly has been an overinvestment in the United States in when we could build wind turbines out there, and we could build wind turbines over there, and we could put solar over there. And when you start to put remote generating sources everywhere, the cost of transmission is the fastest rising piece of the rising electricity bills in the United States. So we want transmission that makes sense, that debottlenecks. But, you know, a lot of the transmission, some that we built and that we're trying to build, is really just an additional subsidy to take it, you know, a low value energy source and make it monetizable. So we don't want to do that, but we do need to make our grid, you know, more robust and better connected. Mm-hmm. Sorry for the complicated answer. It's not a good answer.
Hello, thank you for being with us. I'm an independent energy consultant. You mentioned the new ambitions of the US in nuclear, and you mostly, if I understood right, spoke of fission. I would like to have your view on fusion. What is the role of fusion in this new ambition and in the nuclear American portfolio?
Well, as a 16-year-old kid, I decided the mania when I was a kid was that the world was coming to an end soon, and the problem was oil, gas, and coal. It very parallel. Then it was that we were running out of oil and gas and coal. Industrial society was going to collapse, and mass starvation was not far behind. You know, as a kid who loved science and math, I was very interested in astronomy. That was pessimistic, and so I chose to go to MIT from Colorado. I didn't want to go to the East Coast. I chose to go to MIT specifically to work on fusion energy, you know, at the Alcator A and C tokamaks. So I'm a passionate, from my youth, intrigued by fusion. We have ramping up efforts from the DOE in fusion. Now inertial confinement every bit as much as magnetic confinement fusion. We're talking about partnerships overseas with the European endeavors in fusion. So I'm quite passionate about it. And I think with AI and with some advancements in material science, I am optimistic that we will see pathways to harness commercial fusion energy in the next few years. As you know of our Livermore at the NIF facility, but you know, of course, that's just at the thing, that's not at the wall plug. But we have at least two very serious inertial confinement businesses that I think are gonna leap way past what we did at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and with Commonwealth Fusion and others in magnetic confinement and even in the electromagnetic implosion fusion. So in any case, I'm bullish on fusion as well, but people always say it's not the cost of the fuel that matters. People always say, well, solar's free because the sun's free. Well, you know, it's the machine cost that matters, right? For natural gas, electricity, the cost of gas isn't even a big piece of it. It's the machines. So the question is, can we build fusion machines that are cost competitive with fission machines? And if we can, it would be fantastic. And if they're even better, you know, to me, more energy is better. Yeah, if we had twice as much electricity in the United States today, all of it would be consumed rapidly with the speed we can build data centers and reindustrialize manufacturing. So yes, we want to drive fission forward. We want to drive fusion forward. Are you in the fusion industry?
Not yet, but I can assure you. Right. I can assure you that we hosted also Commonwealth Fusion System and their European partners, and very recently, so we get acquainted to all these progress, which was remarkable. And then we have ITER, of course, here in France.
Yes.
And the Commissariat à l'Énergie Atomique. And by the way, Germany has a huge ecosystem. Italy has one. France has one. So one more thing in common. So I'm sure we will deliver on that. That's maybe a good news to come sooner than what we anticipated. Question over there in the back.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Fabrice Naudet-Langlois. I'm a journalist with the French daily newspaper Le Figaro. Secretary Wright, I think you traveled just a couple of days ago in Venezuela. Can you share with us some details about what could be the prospects for oil production for US companies, and what are the incentives for US companies to produce, to invest in Venezuela? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So, you know, Venezuela has just been, 26 years spiraling down from one of the wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere to a country in dire poverty. 8 million people, the largest outward migration from a company in modern history, and the first time that about 6 million of those 8 million people left Venezuela to go to even poorer countries. You know, that's the situation on the ground in Venezuela: drugs, crime, and troubles. So the U.S. interest in Venezuela is mostly geopolitics. But because it has such enormous energy resources, President Trump's always thinking through a lens of commerce. How can we impact the Middle East or this country or this region or this state economically? We don't want to use force. How can we do something economically? So with Venezuela, there'd long been a blockade, or sanctions on their oil exports, which just never enforced. President Trump said, we're going to enforce a quarantine on the oil exports from Venezuela. And I bet you things will change pretty quickly. And they did. So I started in dialogues with Venezuelans about how to do something that benefits both of us here. They obviously want to be able to sell their oil. So we now control the sale of that oil, but all of that oil goes into an account in their name, and that money goes back down to Venezuela. And so what it allows us to do is have enormous influence over their behavior. Like when I was down there, there was a giant free press spray outside of the palace when we walked out of the palace. I don't think they'd seen that in certainly over 2 decades. We've seen the release of hundreds of political prisoners. There's still hundreds more. There's still a long room to go. But the goal is to use energy, commerce, and trade, not American soldiers, not American tax dollars, to try to fix a hemispheric problem that's hurt our country, that's hurt the hemisphere, and certainly been devastating for Venezuelans. The optimism of people's faces on the streets when I was in Venezuela was tremendous. So back to oil production, it's a little less than 1 million barrels a day. Today, I think you'll see several 100,000 barrels a day of additional production by the end of this year. World oil demand grows by about 1 million barrels a day per year. So could be 30 or 40% of incremental oil demand this year will come from one country, from Venezuela. A little bit of downward pressure on oil prices there. And then, of course, in the coming years, much more dramatic increases are possible.
Will be a fantastic race to watch between Guyana and Venezuela. Who ramps up fastest? But we're looking forward to see that. Indeed. There were questions over there. Yes.
Thank you very much, Secretary Wright. Ian Johnston from the Financial Times. I had a question about the IEA that you're in town to go to tomorrow and the following day. You'd previously described their outlooks as being nonsense, particularly with regard to peak oil demand. They've since brought in their current policy scenarios and changed a little bit. I'm wondering, are you still considering reforming or pulling out of the IEA, or are you satisfied that they are adapting to your demands?
Yeah, okay, well, definitely not satisfied. We're not there yet, but I should give Fatih Birol and the leadership there some credit. Yeah, putting back in the current policies thing, that's certainly a step in the right direction. There's a focus now on a clean cooking fuel initiative, which we're also doing in the U.S. government. I mentioned that earlier. We have 2 billion people and over 2 million deaths per year on a solvable problem. That's just energy and infrastructure and even a relatively modest amount of money. But yet you never hear about that stuff. But now they're talking about it. And Fatih himself has in the past. But yeah, we want to meaningfully move the IEA. There's only 3 organizations that collect careful energy data. As they said, energy is the infrastructure of the world. It's very important. I don't want 2 energy agencies. I love having 3. But that IEA, for the U.S. to remain a long-term member, has to finish the reform. As you just said, so much of what they do is I call it the 53rd Climate Advocacy Organization. We got 1 million of those. We don't need a net zero scenario. That's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. Net zero 2050. Then all these other things. These are just politicians' dreams about greater control, and we can drive up the price of energy so high that the demand for energy will plummet. To me, that's inhuman, that's immoral, it's totally unrealistic, it's not going to happen. And if so much of a data reporting agencies is on these sort of left-wing big government fantasies, that just distorts their mission. So I think the world's got plenty of climate advocacy organizations, and if they want to be another one, cut that part off. It can be the International Climate Advocacy Organization, but take that out of a serious energy group and focus on energy security. It was founded after the Yom Kippur War to make sure the world had enough energy. And it does great quantitative work on energy, but it needs to focus on that mission and not, playing nice with European politicians or American, whoever it was that want them to become making up these fancy. Isn't that crazy? For 5 years, they didn't have if the world goes on kind of like it is today scenario. They didn't have that. It was only like what degree of climate craziness was going to happen in the future. That's not about projecting the future of energy. That's about projecting the future of politics and how much you can impoverish people without them throwing you out of office. So yes, we're not done. But if it goes back to what it was a fabulous international data recording agency. It was getting into critical minerals, was focused on big energy issues. We're all in on that. But if they insist that it's so dominated and infused with climate stuff, yeah, then we're out. Like we're about people and math. That's what energy is about, people and math, not climate politics.
There was a question just next to you. Yes, madam.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Julia Renner with Breakthrough Energy. You mentioned a number of companies that we've invested in, Commonwealth Fusion, Fervo, and many other opportunities. Coming back to the point that Marc-Antoine made earlier, where there's perhaps less collaboration around regulation, I have a question around innovation and where you see partnerships with other countries and what would be the priorities on the innovation agenda?
Yeah, so yeah, I would say it's our tagline for our administration, yeah, innovation, not regulation. That's what drives progress and improvement. Geothermal certainly is an area of interest and focus of our government. And the reason is that geothermal can provide power 24/7. You don't need the wind blowing, you don't need the sun shining. That difference is just dramatic. And as you know, like I was involved with Fervo before, not only can you provide power in all weathers, you can ramp up at peak demand times and you can ramp down at low demand times. That's very valuable energy. Using shale technology that continues to get better. So in all my travels around the world, there's a lot of interest in geothermal. There's a lot of interest in nuclear. And, you know, scientists and brilliant innovators and engineers, they're all over the planet. You know, they're not in one country or this country. So I am all about, and the Trump administration is all about partnerships and cooperations to drive innovation forward. Again, an innovation that's consistent with energy being about humans and math. You know, are nuclear and geothermal as cheap as combined cycle natural gas today? No, but they could be. If they could be, innovation could get them there. That's worth investing in. But if you're only going to produce energy, you know, when the wind is blowing, it's just, if they were free, it wouldn't really be a value add because you'd still have to have transmission lines connect and operate, and you still need all the same kit for when it isn't blowing. So we don't want to spend money on things we don't think add to the energy system, but we're all in on innovation and everything that could. And thank you for, that's a great work you're doing.
And by the way, I think in Europe, we think the same about geothermal. We just need more of that. So, and we have the capability. So that's one more point of convergence. So we'll take a last question here because time is running out.
Nice to have all your speech today and your views. Just one question about, you spoke about production, a lot about producing more energy, etc. Is it not a real topic just to consider also what I call recycling, which is trying to get the best energy also from waste and things like that? And I'm thinking obviously of the aircraft industry and all what could be done around the SAF, and also all the, let's say, the waste is there, and you can reuse it. It's also an innovation topic that could be dealt between the United States and Europe. So what's your views about that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned SAF. I've just never seen math that looks encouraging on large-scale biofuels. But as far as waste heat and efficiency and all that, 100%, you know, to me, that's a way of getting more energy. That's just another way of getting more energy. In this book I wrote, kind of a summary of energy and climate change and history of energy, I show a plot in the history of efficiency from energy use. Humans are ingenious. So all the time we have data, we continually get more efficient at using energy. But people often think, well, for 10% more efficient, it means we'll consume 10% less energy. It never works that way, right? Because if you're 10% more efficient, it means you've lowered the relative cost of energy, which means there's even more uses for it. So efficiency sort of just makes energy even more valuable, and it helps drive the demand. But I totally agree with you. There are great technologies to capture waste heat, to be more efficient users of energy, to build better machines. You're right, I didn't talk about that, but I should have. Or I should have mentioned it. I agree with you. Also, very important stuff.
Secretary, it was a breathtaking hour with you, which has run so fast. It was fascinating to see that it must be great to work for you because you have no notes. So your staff must be really relieved, and I'd like to thank also your staff for making sure you come to join us for this conversation, and also all the colleagues that made it possible to welcome you, and of course all of you who came so numerous today. Secretary, we have We hope to see you back in France soon. We are grateful that the IEA is still there and that you are still part of it, because that makes you come. But we hope you will be able to also join on other aspects and to come back to IFRI. And we, on our turn, I think we'll all love to come for the final, for the soccer final to New York on the 19th of July. And I think it will be France-US, that's for sure. Now, who will win? Well, I have an idea, but let's see. Yeah.
France has been outstanding in football recently. So yeah, incredible team. I should have said also, of course, incredible scientific and mathematical history. Oh my God, has France produced some just unbelievable scientific pioneers that have influenced everything I do and in my life. And you also mentioned my team members at DOE. They're not the lucky ones. I'm the lucky ones. When I got this job, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've never been in government, so this was way out of the box. I get asked to serve your country. Yeah, of course. But how many people, and several of them sitting right there, that were mid-career, had kids, doing their lives, that said, hey, if you want me, I'm in. I can't believe how many people uprooted their lives, plummeted their income, and said, absolutely, I want to come help better energize the country and serve the mission. So I'm thankful and proud for the awesome partners I have. And also thankful and proud to be in this fantastic nation of France, and the French people that have changed the world. And one could certainly our most important ally in our Revolutionary War, and our very, very important ally in every major American endeavor. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you.
It's great. It's fun.
Thank you so much.